Before we embark on this incredible journey together, I have a small, heartfelt request. Please subscribe to my channel, give this video a like. It costs you nothing but means the world to me. And let me know in the comments which beautiful corner of the world you're watching from. Your support truly makes a difference. The envelope arrived at 3:47 p.m. on June 15th, 2024. I remember the exact time because I was watching the kitchen clock, waiting for Marcus to come home for his graduation dinner. 22 years of raising him, and I was about to discover that none of it belonged to me. The return address said, Cascade Medical Laboratory. My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside, clinical language reduced my world to percentages. Probability of paternity? 0%? 0. Not even a maybe. Just absolute mathematical certainty that the child I'd loved, supported, and sacrificed for wasn't mine. I'd ordered the test 3 weeks earlier after finding old photographs in David's belongings. Photographs I'd never seen before. Photos of him with Sandra Morrison, our next-door neighbor, taken during what she'd told me was her difficult pregnancy 23 years ago. Photos time-stamped June through November 1999. Photos showing them laughing, holding hands, her belly growing rounder. The same month, Sandra claimed she was too sick to see anyone. My husband David had been dead for 2 years, but suddenly I understood why he'd always insisted Marcus had Sandra's laugh. Why he'd paid for Marcus's expensive engineering program without question, even when we struggled with other bills. Why Sandra had moved away so suddenly after Marcus's high school graduation, claiming she needed a fresh start. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at genetic proof that my entire adult life had been built on a lie. Tomorrow was Marcus's college graduation. I'd bought him a $300 watch I couldn't afford, planned a celebration dinner, invited our closest friends. I'd even written him a letter about how proud his father would be. But David wasn't his father. I wasn't his mother. We were just the people who'd been fooled. And Sandra Morrison, who'd watched me struggle as a single mother for 2 years, who'd accepted my casseroles and my help with her elderly mother, who'd hugged me at David's funeral and told me Marcus was lucky to have such a devoted mother. She'd known the truth all along. The front door opened. "Mom, I'm home!" Marcus called out, his voice bright with excitement about tomorrow's ceremony. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my purse, my decision already forming. Sometimes the most devastating truths arrive disguised as ordinary mail. "Hey, Mom, you okay?" Marcus dropped his backpack by the door and studied my face with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine, sweetheart, just tired from all the graduation preparations." The lie came easily, 22 years of maternal protection kicking in automatically. He grinned, that familiar crooked smile that I now realized looked exactly like Sandra's. "Did the flowers arrive for tomorrow? I can't wait for everyone to see the setup. Professor Chen said she's never seen a better senior project than mine." I nodded, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. "They're beautiful. Purple roses, just like you requested." Marcus had graduated summa cum laude from mechanical engineering. His thesis on renewable energy systems had already caught the attention of 3 major companies. He was brilliant, driven, everything any mother would be proud of. Except I wasn't his mother. "I picked up my cap and gown today," he continued, hanging his jacket on the chair David used to use. "The photographer wants to start at 10 a.m. sharp. You'll be there, right?" "Of course. I wouldn't miss it for the world." Another lie. Because suddenly everything felt different. The pride I'd always felt in his achievements, was it mine to feel? The sacrifices I'd made working double shifts to pay for his textbooks and lab fees, had they been for someone else's child? "Mom, seriously, what's wrong? You're being weird." I looked at this young man I'd raised from a colicky baby to a confident adult. I taught him to tie his shoes, helped him with algebra homework, held him when he cried over his first heartbreak. But genetics doesn't lie, and the letter in my purse was clear. "Marcus, I need to ask you something." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Do you remember much about Sandra Morrison?" His expression shifted slightly. Mrs. Morrison? Our old neighbor? Not really. Why? She moved away right after your high school graduation. Never said goodbye to me, which seemed strange after 15 years of friendship. Marcus shrugged. Maybe she was busy. People move on, Mom. Do you remember her being sick when you were born? I guess. You always said she had some complications with her pregnancy around the same time I was born. Why are you thinking about this now? Because I found photos of her with your father that tell a very different story, I thought. Because the dates don't match what anyone told me. Because I'm starting to understand that the two people I trusted most in the world built my life on lies. Just reminiscing before your graduation, I said instead. Marcus smiled, completely unaware that tomorrow would change everything between us. The hardest part about discovering a lie is realizing how many other things suddenly make sense. I couldn't sleep that night. Every memory felt contaminated. I kept thinking about Sandra's behavior during those crucial months in 1999. She'd claimed to be bedridden with severe morning sickness, but David would disappear for hours, saying he was helping with her groceries or fixing her leaky faucet. At 2 a.m., I pulled out the shoebox of photos I'd found in David's closet after his death. I'd only glanced through them before. Too painful to revisit memories when grief was still raw. Now I examined each image with forensic attention. June 14, 1999. David and Sandra, at what looked like a doctor's office. Her hand resting on her small belly, his arm around her shoulders. Both smiling. July 22, 1999. A restaurant I didn't recognize. Sandra's profile showing a definite bump. David's hand covering hers on the table. August 10, 1999. A beach somewhere. Sandra in a maternity swimsuit, David building sandcastles nearby. They looked like a couple planning their future. September 18, 1999. The most devastating one. Sandra's baby shower. I'd never been invited to any baby shower for her. In the photo, she was opening gifts while David watched from beside the cake table, looking proud and protective. I'd been working extra shifts at the hospital during those months, saving money because David told me we needed to be more careful with finances. Sandra might need our help, he'd said. Her situation is complicated. Her situation, not her pregnancy complications, her situation. My phone rang at 6:30 a.m. Marcus, calling from his apartment. Mom, I know this sounds crazy, but I've been thinking about what you asked yesterday. About Mrs. Morrison. My heart stopped. What about her? I found something weird when I was packing up Dad's old workshop last month. There was a birth certificate copy in his toolbox, but it wasn't mine. What do you mean? It had my name on it, but the father's name was blank. Isn't that strange? I thought maybe it was some kind of mistake or preliminary document. I sat down heavily. Where is it now? Still in the toolbox, I think. I can bring it to graduation if you want to see it. Yes, please do that. After hanging up, I realized Marcus was starting to piece things together too. 22 years old, brilliant enough to graduate summa cum laude, he was beginning to notice the inconsistencies that had been hidden from both of us. I made coffee with shaking hands and called my sister Jenny. Ruth, it's 6:30 in the morning. What's wrong? Jenny, I need to ask you something about Marcus's birth. Do you remember anything unusual about that time? A long pause. Unusual how? About David's behavior. About Sandra Morrison. Another pause, longer this time. Ruth, why are you asking about this now? Just answer me, please. Jenny sighed. I always wondered why David seemed so stressed during your labor. He kept checking his phone, disappearing to make calls. When Marcus was born, he seemed almost guilty, but I figured it was just new father nerves. Did you ever suspect anything between David and Sandra? Jenny's voice grew careful. I saw them together once, at the grocery store, around the time Marcus was born. They were in the baby aisle, looking very comfortable together, but I convinced myself I was imagining things. The truth was assembling itself piece by piece, and I could no longer pretend it wasn't happening. Some secrets are buried so deep that unearthing them feels like archaeological excavation. Graduation morning arrived gray and drizzling. I dressed carefully in my navy blue dress, the one David had complimented me on at Marcus's high school graduation. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus picked me up at 8:30, looking handsome in his pressed shirt and tie. "You brought the birth certificate?" I asked as soon as I got in his car. He handed me a manila envelope. "It's in there." "Mom, what's this really about?" I pulled out the document and examined it carefully. Certificate of live birth dated November 3rd, 1999. Marcus David Williams. Mother, Sandra Elizabeth Morrison. Father, blank, not Ruth Williams. Sandra Morrison. "Marcus, pull over." "What? Why?" "Just pull over, now." He parked in a McDonald's lot, turning to face me with growing concern. "Mom, you're scaring me." I handed him the paternity test results. "I need you to read this." He unfolded the paper, scanning the clinical language. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, comprehension, and finally, anger. "What the hell is this? Some kind of joke?" "I had the test done 3 weeks ago, after I found photos of your father with Sandra Morrison during her pregnancy." Marcus stared at the paper. This says Dad wasn't my biological father." "That's correct. And this birth certificate says Sandra Morrison was my birth mother." "Yes." He was quiet for a long time, processing. Finally, "So you're not my mom either." The words hit like a physical blow, even though I'd been preparing for this moment. "Biologically, no. But Marcus, I've been your mother in every way that matters for 22 years. "Have you?" His voice turned sharp. "Because a real mother would have told me the truth." "I didn't know the truth until 3 weeks ago." "You suspected, though, didn't you? All those questions about Sandra Morrison. You've been investigating this." I couldn't deny it. "Yes." Marcus crumpled the lab report in his fist. "So, my entire life has been a lie. My parents aren't my parents. My name isn't even my real name." "Your name is real. We legally adopted you when you were born." "Adopted me from who? Sandra? Why didn't she keep me?" "I don't know. I'm still trying to figure that out." He laughed bitterly. "Great. Just great. On my graduation day, I find out I don't even know who I am." We sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Marcus started the car. "Where are we going?" I asked. "To graduation. I worked 4 years for this degree. I'm not letting anyone's lies ruin it." But his hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and I knew that everything between us had already changed forever. The ceremony that should have celebrated our family instead became the day we discovered we weren't one. The university auditorium buzzed with excitement as families found their seats. I spotted several people I knew: Marcus's professors, friends from high school, my co-workers from the hospital. They all waved and smiled, expecting to share in our joy. If only they knew what we'd discovered 2 hours ago. Marcus sat in the graduate section, cap and gown making him look official and adult. From a distance, I could pretend this was still the proud moment I'd anticipated. But every time he looked in my direction, I saw the hurt and confusion in his eyes. "Ruth!" A familiar voice made me turn. Dr. Patricia Chen, Marcus's thesis advisor, approached with a warm smile. "I'm so excited for today. Marcus's project was exceptional. You must be incredibly proud." "Yes, very proud," I managed. "He speaks about you so often in class. My mom always says this. My mom taught me that. It's clear you've been a wonderful influence on his life." The words that should have warmed my heart instead felt like knives. My mom, would he still call me that after today? Dr. Chen continued chatting about Marcus's job prospects and graduate school opportunities. I nodded and smiled, playing the role of devoted mother one more time. "Mrs. Williams?" A young woman approached hesitantly. "I'm Sarah Collins, Marcus's girlfriend. We've been dating for 6 months." I studied her face, surprised. Marcus hadn't mentioned a serious girlfriend. "It's nice to meet you, Sarah." "Marcus talks about you constantly. He's so grateful for everything you've sacrificed for his education. He always says you're the strongest woman he knows." Another knife twist. "That's very kind of you to say." Sarah glanced toward the graduate section. "He seemed upset when he arrived today. I hope everything's okay?" I followed her gaze to Marcus, who was staring straight ahead with rigid posture. "Just pre-graduation nerves, I think." The ceremony began with the usual pomp and circumstance. The dean spoke about achievement and legacy. The valedictorian gave a speech about gratitude to parents and family. Marcus's name was called for the Engineering Honor Society. As he walked across the stage to receive his recognition, the audience around me erupted in applause. I found myself clapping too, muscle memory taking over, but my chest felt hollow. Marcus David Williams, summa cum laude, Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering. The announcer's voice carried across the auditorium as Marcus shook the dean's hand and posed for photos. In that moment, I felt a strange mix of pride and loss. This brilliant young man had achieved something remarkable, but I was no longer sure what my role in that achievement had been. After the ceremony, families gathered outside for photos and celebrations. Marcus found me in the crowd, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Privately." We walked to a quiet area behind the auditorium. Marcus removed his cap and ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd seen David make 1,000 times. "I've been thinking about everything you told me this morning." "Marcus, No, let me finish. I need to know who Sandra Morrison really is, and I need to know why she gave me up." I looked at this young man I'd raised, seeing David's determined expression on features that I now realized belonged to someone else entirely. The truth was going to get messier before it got clearer. Finding someone who's been hiding for 4 years requires more than just good intentions. We drove to my house in tense silence after the graduation ceremony. Marcus's girlfriend Sarah had been disappointed when he canceled their celebration dinner, but he'd promised to explain later. Some conversations, he told her, needed to happen in private first. I made coffee while Marcus sat at the kitchen table, still wearing his dress shirt but having loosened his tie. The cap and gown hung over the chair like a graduation ghost. "So where do we start?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. I pulled out a notebook where I'd been documenting everything I'd discovered. Sandra Morrison moved to Portland, Oregon in June 2020. She sold her house here through a realtor, but left no forwarding address with neighbors. "How do you know she went to Portland?" "I hired a private investigator last week, a man named Robert Kim, who specializes in finding people who don't want to be found." Marcus raised his eyebrows. "You hired a PI? Mom, how much is this costing you?" "Don't worry about the money." I dipped into my small retirement savings, but Marcus didn't need to know that. Robert found property records showing Sandra purchased a condominium in Portland's Pearl District in July 2020. She's living under her maiden name now, Sandra Elizabeth Garrett. I handed him a printed report. She works as a medical transcriptionist for Portland General Hospital. Never married after her divorce from Jim Morrison in 1998. No other children on record. Marcus studied the documents. "This feels like stalking. This feels like finding answers to questions that have shaped your entire life." He was quiet for a moment, then looked up at me. "What about my biological father? Who was he really?" This was the question I'd been dreading. "The photos suggest it was David, but we'd need confirmation." From Sandra. "Yes, so we're going to Portland." I'd been hoping he'd say that, but also terrified he would. "Are you sure? This could complicate things even more." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Ruth!" He stopped, seeming to realize he'd used my first name instead of Mom for the first time. "Sorry, this is going to take some adjustment." "You can still call me Mom, Marcus. That doesn't have to change." "Doesn't it, though? Everything else has changed. Why not that too? His words stung, but I understood. Everything between us was being renegotiated now. What I was going to say, he continued, is that things are already complicated. I need to understand what happened, why David and Sandra made the choices they made, why I was given to you instead of being raised by my biological parents. I poured coffee for both of us, buying time to organize my thoughts. Robert Kim found something else. Sandra's medical records from 1999 show she had prenatal care under her own name and insurance, but the birth certificate lists her as the mother and David as present for delivery. You were never legally adopted through normal channels. What does that mean? It means someone falsified documents. The birth certificate showing me as your mother was created after the fact, probably to make the custody transfer appear legitimate. Marcus set down his coffee cup hard. So, they committed fraud. It appears so. And you had no idea? I met his eyes. Marcus, I swear to you, I had no idea. David told me you were an abandoned baby he'd found through a private adoption agency. He handled all the paperwork while I recovered from what I thought was a difficult labor that resulted in me being unable to have children. You thought you'd given birth to me? The question hung in the air. I'd never admitted this out loud, even to myself. There are gaps in my memory from that time. I was on medication for postpartum depression. David told me you were born premature and had to stay in the NICU for several weeks. He said the trauma of your birth caused me to block some memories. Marcus stared at me. You never actually gave birth to me at all, did you? The truth felt like swallowing broken glass, but I owed him honesty. I don't think so. No. Some truths are so carefully constructed that unraveling them feels like dismantling a house of cards. The next morning, Marcus arrived at my house at 7 a.m. with 2 coffee cups and a determined expression. I bought us plane tickets to Portland, he announced. We leave Thursday morning. Marcus, you don't have to... Yes, I do. I graduate college once. I turn 22 once. I discover my entire identity is fabricated once. This needs to happen now, while I still have the courage. I accepted the coffee gratefully. What about Sarah? Your job interviews? Sarah understands. The job interviews can wait. He sat down across from me. I called Robert Kim this morning. He's going to meet us at the Portland airport with Sandra's current address and workplace schedule. You called him directly? You hired him to find information for our family. I'm part of this family, aren't I? Marcus's tone held a challenge. Or am I not, now that we know the biology? Of course you're part of this family. You always will be. Then let me be part of the decisions, too. I nodded, recognizing that this situation required us to relate as equals rather than parent and child. What did Robert tell you? Marcus pulled out his phone and consulted notes. Sandra works Tuesday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. She lives alone in a 1-bedroom condo on the 14th floor of a building called Meridian Tower. She has no criminal record, no outstanding debts, no apparent family connections in Portland. Sounds like she's been living quietly. Or hiding, Marcus said grimly. Robert also found something interesting. Sandra's bank records show she's been receiving monthly payments of $800 from an account that was originally set up by David Williams. My coffee cup slipped from my hands, clattering on the table. What? Dad was sending her money every month. Even after his death, the payments continued automatically until the account was closed when you settled his estate. I felt dizzy. For how long? 22 years, from November 1999 until September 2022. I did the math quickly, over $200,000. Money that came from your joint household account, money you helped earn. The implications hit me like a freight train. David hadn't just hidden Marcus's paternity and Sandra's role. He'd been financially supporting her for Marcus's entire life, using money I'd helped earn working double shifts at the hospital. There's more, Marcus continued. The payments increased every January, like cost of living adjustments. I thought about all the times David had told me we needed to be careful with money, the vacations we didn't take, the car repairs I'd postponed, The night I'd worked overtime to pay for Marcus's school supplies, while David was secretly sending Sandra enough money to live comfortably in Portland. "Ruth, I need to ask you something difficult." I looked up at Marcus, noticing he'd used my first name again. "Did Dad ever physically abuse you? Or emotionally manipulate you?" The question caught me off guard. "Why would you ask that?" "Because what he did to you, to us, wasn't just infidelity or lying. It was systematic deception spanning decades. He made you believe you'd given birth to me when you hadn't. He made you work extra shifts to support a household, while he secretly funded his ex-lover's life. He let you grieve infertility that may not have even existed." Marcus leaned forward. That level of manipulation suggests someone who was willing to control and deceive the people closest to him. I'm wondering if there were other signs you might have minimized or forgotten. I sat quietly, thinking about my marriage to David. Had there been red flags I'd ignored? "He was always very insistent about handling finances," I said slowly. "I never saw bank statements. He said it was easier if one person managed the money." "What else?" "He didn't like me spending time with my sister Jenny. Said she was too nosy about our business." "And?" "He chose our doctors, our insurance, our neighborhood, but I thought that was just him being thorough and protective." Marcus was watching me carefully. "Ruth, I think David didn't just lie to us about my parentage. I think he constructed an entire false reality to keep you from discovering what he'd done." The house of cards was collapsing, and I was beginning to understand that the man I'd loved and mourned might have been someone I'd never really known at all. Portland's Pearl District looked exactly like the kind of place someone would go to disappear from their past. We landed Thursday afternoon under typical Oregon drizzle. Robert Kim met us at baggage claim, a small, efficient man in his 50s with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. "Mrs. Williams, Marcus," he greeted us. "I've prepared a full briefing for you, but first, I need to warn you about something we discovered yesterday." "What kind of something?" Marcus asked. Robert gestured toward the airport coffee shop. "Let's sit down." Once we were settled with coffee, Robert opened a manila folder. Sandra Morrison, Sandra Garrett now, has been receiving those monthly payments for 22 years, as we discussed. But she's also been keeping detailed records of Marcus's life. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Report cards, newspaper clippings about his academic achievements, photos from school events. She has a scrapbook documenting his entire childhood and adolescence." Marcus went pale. "How did she get photos from my school events?" That's what concerned me. Either she's been watching from a distance, or someone was sending her information. Robert pulled out photocopied pages. "These are from her scrapbook, which my source was able to photograph. Look at the dates and detail level." The pages showed Marcus's elementary school graduation, his science fair victory in 8th grade, his high school football team photos. Pictures I remembered taking, but also pictures from angles I'd never shot. "Someone was feeding her information," I said slowly. "Or she was there," Marcus said grimly. "At my school events, staying hidden in crowds." Robert nodded. "There's more. Sandra's apartment building has excellent security cameras. The footage shows she's received visitors only 3 times in the past 4 years. All 3 visitors were the same person, a woman matching your description, Mrs. Williams." I stared at him. "That's impossible. I've never been to Portland. I've never seen Sandra since she moved away." "The woman had your approximate height and build, but we can't see her face clearly in the footage. However, she arrived driving a car with Washington state plates registered to David Williams." My blood turned cold. David's been dead for 2 years. "Yes, ma'am. These visits occurred in March 2021, August 2021, and December 2021. All while David was still alive, but after his cancer diagnosis." Marcus and I looked at each other. David had made several unexplained trips during his illness, claiming he needed time alone to process his diagnosis. Weekend trips where he'd return exhausted, but wouldn't discuss where he'd been. "He was visiting Sandra while he was dying," I said. It appears so, and according to the building's visitor logs, he signed in using the name Richard Williams each time. Richard was David's middle name, I told Robert. The visits lasted between 6 and 8 hours each time, long enough for extensive conversations. Marcus slumped in his chair. He was probably updating her about his condition, making sure she'd be okay financially after he died. "There's one more thing," Robert said quietly. "Sandra's neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, enjoys talking to my associate. She mentioned that Sandra's been very sad lately. Apparently, Sandra told her she was expecting a visit from her son, who'd just graduated college, and she was nervous about seeing him." The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm. "She knows we're coming?" "She knows someone's coming. She may not know it's both of you." Marcus stood up abruptly. "Let's go. I want to get this over with." "Marcus, wait." I reached for his arm. "We should think about what we're going to say." "What is there to think about? I want to know why she gave me away. I want to know what kind of person takes monthly payments for 22 years to stay away from their own child. I want to know why my entire life has been built on lies." His voice was rising, attracting attention from other travelers. I could see the pain behind his anger, the fear beneath his determination. "I understand you're angry," I said gently, "but Sandra's been living with these secrets for as long as we have. Whatever happened in 1999, it shaped her life too." "Are you defending her?" Marcus asked incredulously. "I'm trying to understand her. There's a difference." Robert gathered his papers. "My car is outside. Sandra's building is 15 minutes away. But I should mention she took today off from work. She's waiting for you." Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Meridian Tower rose like a glass and steel monument to successful hiding. The lobby was all polished marble and geometric furniture, designed to impress but not comfort. A doorman checked our names against a visitor list and directed us to the 14th floor. Standing outside apartment 1407, I could hear classical music playing softly inside. Mozart, I thought. David had loved Mozart. "Last chance to change our minds," I whispered to Marcus. He shook his head and knocked firmly. The music stopped. Footsteps approached the door, paused, then the deadbolt turned. Sandra Morrison opened the door, and for a moment, we all just stared. 25 years had changed her, but she was still beautiful in a careful, preserved way. Her blonde hair was shorter now, expensively cut. She wore a simple black dress and pearl earrings, but her eyes looked exhausted. "Hello, Marcus," she said softly. "Ruth." She'd known we were coming together. "May we come in?" I asked. Sandra stepped aside, and we entered a space that felt more like a museum than a home. Everything was cream and beige, perfectly arranged, sterile. The only personal touches were framed photographs on the mantelpiece. Dozens of them. All of Marcus at different ages. Marcus noticed them immediately. "You've been watching me my entire life." "Not watching," Sandra said carefully. "Following. There's a difference." She gestured toward a pristine white sofa. "Please, sit down. I'll make tea." "We don't want tea," Marcus said. "We want answers." Sandra's hands fluttered nervously. "Of course, yes, answers." She sat across from us in a matching chair, her posture perfect despite the circumstances. Everything about her screamed composure, but I could see the tremor in her hands. "Why?" Marcus asked simply. "Why did you give me to David and Ruth instead of raising me yourself?" Sandra was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. "You look so much like him, especially around the eyes." "Like David?" "Yes. Your father was a remarkable man, Marcus. Brilliant, ambitious, but also deeply conflicted about what he wanted from life." I felt something twist in my chest. Even now, talking about my deceased husband, Sandra spoke about him with tenderness. "David and I had an affair," Sandra continued. "It lasted about 8 months. I was married to Jim Morrison, but that relationship was already failing. David was married to Ruth and he loved Ruth, but he was also attracted to the idea of a different kind of life. A life with you, Marcus said. A life with possibilities he felt he'd missed. When I became pregnant, we had to make choices neither of us wanted to make. Sandra stood up and walked to the mantelpiece, touching one of the photos. David wanted to leave Ruth and marry me. He wanted us to raise you together as a family. I felt the room tilt. But you didn't want that. Sandra turned back to me. I was terrified, Ruth. I'd already made one marriage mistake with Jim. I wasn't ready to commit my life to another man, even one I cared about deeply. And David was intense. When he wanted something, he pursued it relentlessly. So you decided to give Marcus away, I said. We decided together. David suggested you as the mother because he knew you wanted children desperately. He said you'd been trying for years without success. The cruelty of it hit me like a slap. They'd solved their problem by exploiting my deepest pain. But why the elaborate deception? Marcus asked. Why not just arrange a normal adoption? Sandra returned to her chair, her composure cracking slightly. Because David couldn't bear the idea of completely losing you. He wanted to be your father in every way that mattered. He wanted to raise you, teach you, guide you into adulthood. And you were willing to just disappear? I thought I was. At 19, giving up a baby seemed like the hardest thing I'd ever have to do. I didn't realize that staying away would be even harder. She gestured toward the photographs. David sent me pictures and updates regularly. Report cards, school programs, birthday photos. He knew I needed to watch you grow up, even from a distance. And the monthly payments? I asked. Guilt money, Sandra said simply. David felt responsible for my situation. The money allowed me to finish college, start over in a new city, build an independent life, but it also kept me connected to both of you. Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Portland skyline. So, you've been living off my family for 22 years while I grew up thinking I was someone I'm not. Marcus, you are exactly who you've always been. You're David's son, you're Ruth's son. Biology doesn't change love. Doesn't it? Marcus turned back to face her. Because I'm looking at my biological mother right now, and I don't feel anything except anger. Sandra flinched, as if he'd struck her, and I realized we were all about to discover just how devastating the truth could be. The most dangerous moment in any confrontation is when people finally tell the truth. Sandra walked to her kitchen and returned with a glass of water, her hands shaking slightly as she drank. There's something else you need to know, she said quietly, about David's final visits to me. Marcus and I waited. He was dying, and he knew it. The cancer was progressing faster than he'd told you, Ruth. He came here to make arrangements. What kind of arrangements? I asked. Sandra set down her glass. He wanted me to contact Marcus after his death. He wanted Marcus to know the truth about his parentage, but he wanted it to come from me, not from some discovery you might make going through his belongings. But you never contacted me, Marcus said. No, because David also told me something that changed everything. Sandra's voice grew quieter. He told me that you, Ruth, had been the best mother Marcus could have asked for. He said watching you raise Marcus had made him understand what real parental love looked like. She looked directly at me. He said he'd been selfish and cruel to orchestrate the deception, but that seeing you with Marcus had taught him that biology matters far less than devotion. So, why didn't you contact Marcus after David died? I pressed. Because David also told me about your financial struggles after his death. The medical bills, the mortgage payments, Marcus's college expenses. He begged me to stay away unless Marcus came looking for me himself. Sandra walked back to the photographs. He said if Marcus was happy with the life you'd given him, then our secret should die with David. But if Marcus ever felt incomplete or started asking questions, then he would find me eventually. And you believed that? I hoped for it. Every month for the past 2 years, I've wondered if today would be the day. Marcus had been pacing during this conversation, and now he stopped directly in front of Sandra. "Do you want to be my mother now?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Sandra looked at him for a long moment. "I want to know you, Marcus. I want to understand who you've become, but I don't want to replace the relationship you have with Ruth." "What if that relationship is broken now?" Marcus asked. "What if finding out she's not my biological mother changes everything between us?" "Then you'll have to decide what kind of person you want to be," Sandra said. "Someone who values the people who loved you unconditionally, or someone who gets lost in the complications of genetics." Marcus laughed bitterly. "That's easy for you to say. You're not the one who just discovered his entire identity was fabricated." "No," Sandra agreed. "I'm the one who spent 22 years wondering if I'd made the right choice. I'm the one who celebrated your achievements from a distance and mourned every milestone I missed. I'm the one who loved you enough to stay away." "You loved me enough to stay away?" Marcus's voice rose. "That's the most backwards thing I've ever heard." Sandra's composure finally cracked. Tears began streaming down her face. "What would you have had me do, Marcus? Show up when you were 5 and confuse you about who your parents were? Demand visitation rights that would have destroyed Ruth's family? Fight David for custody and tear your world apart?" She wiped her eyes with a tissue. "I made a choice to let you have a stable, loving home with parents who wanted you desperately. I chose your happiness over my own desires. If that's not love, then I don't understand what love is." The room fell silent, except for Sandra's quiet crying and the distant sound of Portland traffic. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice much softer than before. "I need to know something. Do you regret giving me up?" Sandra looked at him through her tears. "Every single day, but I've never regretted that you were raised by Ruth. She made you into the man you are today. That's something I could never take credit for." For the first time since we'd arrived, I felt something other than anger toward Sandra. She had been living with her own version of grief all these years. "What happens now?" I asked. Sandra stood up and walked to a small desk in the corner. She returned with a manila envelope. "David asked me to give you this if you ever came here." She handed the envelope to me. "It's a letter he wrote during his final visit. He wanted you both to have it if the truth ever came out." Marcus and I looked at each other. Another revelation from David, even from beyond the grave. "I think," Sandra said quietly, "that letter might help you understand why we made the choices we made. And maybe it will help you decide what kind of future the three of us might have together." Sometimes the dead have more to say than the living ever expected. We drove to a quiet coffee shop near Sandra's building to read David's letter. None of us wanted to open it in her sterile apartment, surrounded by photographs of a life lived in secret. Marcus handled the envelope like it might explode. "Part of me doesn't want to read this." "Part of me doesn't either," I admitted. "But we've come this far." The letter was handwritten on David's personal stationery, cream-colored paper with his initials embossed at the top. His handwriting, once so familiar, now looked like evidence from a crime scene. "My dearest Ruth and Marcus," it began. "If you are reading this letter, it means the truth has finally surfaced and you have found Sandra. I am writing this during what I know will be my final visit with her, facing the reality that I may not live long enough to have this conversation with you both in person. Ruth, my beloved wife, I owe you an apology that spans decades. What I did to you was not a moment of weakness or a single poor decision. It was a systematic deception that shaped the fundamental structure of our family. I convinced you that you had given birth to Marcus when you had not. I let you believe you suffered from infertility when there was no medical evidence of that condition. I allowed you to work extra shifts and sacrifice for our family while secretly supporting Sandra with money you helped earn. The magnitude of my betrayal extends beyond infidelity. I stole your right to make informed choices about your own life. You deserve to know that you were raising another woman's child. You deserve to decide whether you wanted to participate in that arrangement. Instead, I made those choices for you because I was too cowardly to face the consequences of my actions. Marcus, my son, and you are my son in every way that matters. You deserved better than to have your origins shrouded in lies. You deserved parents who could tell you honestly how much you were wanted and loved. You deserved to know Sandra as your biological mother, if you chose to, rather than having that relationship hidden from you. I need you both to understand why I made these choices, even though I know they were wrong. In 1999, I was a 35-year-old man who felt trapped by his own decisions. I loved Ruth deeply, but I was also attracted to Sandra's independence and spontaneity. When Sandra became pregnant, I saw it as a sign that I should leave my marriage and start over. I pressured Sandra to build a life with me. But Sandra was wiser than I was. She understood that a relationship built on betraying other people would always be poisoned by that foundation. She refused to marry me or let me abandon my responsibilities to Ruth. When Sandra decided to give you up for adoption, Marcus, I couldn't bear the idea of losing you entirely. I also couldn't bear the idea of confessing my infidelity to Ruth and destroying our marriage. So I constructed an elaborate solution that would allow me to keep both my wife and my son at the cost of honesty and integrity. I told Ruth that you were an abandoned baby we could adopt through private channels. I arranged for falsified birth certificates and medical records. I convinced Ruth that the stress of adoption proceedings had caused her to block certain memories. I paid Sandra to relocate and stay away, but also to maintain contact so I could watch you grow up through photographs and reports. For 22 years, I lived with the weight of this deception. Every time Ruth expressed pride in being your mother, every time you called me Dad, every time our family felt genuinely happy together, I knew it was built on lies I was too selfish to expose. Ruth, you have been the most devoted mother Marcus could have asked for. Your love for him has been pure and unconditional in ways mine never was. You sacrificed for him without knowing his true origins. You celebrated his achievements without understanding the genetics behind them. You worried about him, guided him, and shaped him into the remarkable young man he has become. Sandra, despite staying away, has also loved Marcus in her own way. Her monthly reports to me were filled with questions about his personality, his interests, his future plans. She has mourned every milestone she missed, while respecting the boundaries we established. If you are reading this letter together, it means you have discovered not just the truth about Marcus's parentage, but also the depth of deception that made your family possible. You have every right to be angry with me and with each other, and with the impossible situation I created. But I hope you will also consider this. The love between you has been real, even if its foundation was false. Ruth, you are Marcus's mother in every way that matters. Marcus, Ruth raised you with a devotion that deserves your respect and gratitude. Sandra, your choice to stay away allowed Marcus to have the stable childhood he needed. What happens next is up to the three of you. But please remember that families can be built on choice as well as genetics. The family you create moving forward can be based on truth, respect, and genuine affection. All the things I failed to provide. I am deeply sorry for the pain my choices have caused all of you. I hope someday you can forgive me, but more importantly, I hope you can find a way to forgive each other and build something honest from the wreckage of my deceptions. All my love and eternal regret, David. We sat in silence for several minutes after Marcus finished reading aloud. The coffee shop buzzed with normal afternoon activity around us. Students studying, business people having meetings, friends catching up. Life continuing as usual while our world rearranged itself once again. Well, Marcus said finally, at least now we know everything. Do we? I asked. Or are there other secrets waiting to be discovered? Marcus folded the letter carefully. I think this is enough truth for one lifetime. But I could see in his expression that David's letter had changed something fundamental about how he understood our situation. We flew back to Seattle the next morning, but not before having dinner with Sandra at a small Italian restaurant near her apartment. It wasn't the reunion any of us had imagined, but it was a beginning. Sandra showed us more photographs from Marcus's childhood, pictures David had sent her that I'd never seen before. Marcus at his first science fair, concentrated and serious. Marcus learning to drive, grinning behind the wheel. Marcus at his high school graduation, looking proud and hopeful about his future. "I kept every one," she said simply, even when it hurt to look at them. We talked about practical things too. Sandra wanted to establish a relationship with Marcus, but she insisted it shouldn't diminish the bond between Marcus and me. "Ruth raised you," she told him repeatedly. "I just gave birth to you. There's a difference." Marcus was still processing everything, but I could see him beginning to separate his anger at the situation from his feelings toward the people involved. David had orchestrated the deception, but Sandra and I had both been trying to do right by Marcus within impossible circumstances. On the plane home, Marcus asked me, "Do you regret raising me now that you know I'm not biologically yours?" I thought about the question for a long moment. "Marcus, for 22 years, you've been my son in every way that mattered. Finding out about genetics doesn't change the nights I stayed up when you were sick, or the pride I felt at your graduation, or the love I feel for you right now. But it changes things between us. Some things, yes, but not the important things." He was quiet for a while, looking out the airplane window at clouds that stretched endlessly in all directions. "I want to stay in touch with Sandra," he said finally, "but I also want you to know that you're still my mom. Biology doesn't determine family, choice does." 3 months later, we established new traditions. Sandra visits Seattle twice a year. I've been to Portland once, for Marcus's birthday dinner in November. It's not perfect, and sometimes the situation feels awkward, but we're building something honest from David's legacy of lies. Marcus has started calling me Ruth in casual conversation, but Mom in moments that matter. Sandra has earned the title of birth mother, but she's also become something like a family friend. We're creating our own definitions for relationships that don't fit traditional categories. The most important lesson I've learned is this: truth is harder than lies, but it's also more solid ground on which to build a future. David's deceptions gave us 22 years together as a family, but they also created a foundation that couldn't survive scrutiny. Now we're building something new, messier, more complicated, but absolutely real. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, I hope you understand that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is tell the truth, even when it's painful. Secrets might protect people temporarily, but they always extract a price eventually. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you'd share it with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes, knowing we're not alone in our complicated families is the most valuable gift we can give each other. Ruth Williams.